The average elevation of the Tibetan Plateau exceeds 13,000 feet, higher than most mountain peaks in Europe. It is one of the harshest natural environments on Earth. Here the familiar rules of the world begin to change. The air contains nearly half the oxygen found at sea level. Winter dominates much of the year, and relentless winds are a constant presence. Endless alpine grasslands give way to barren, rocky deserts, beyond which rise the glacier-covered ranges of the Himalayas. Yet for thousands of years, one of the world's most remarkable civilizations has flourished here. Its people learned to survive in conditions that seem impossible for human life. For millions, it is a sacred land where nature is inseparable from the spiritual world. Mountains are regarded as the dwelling places of deities. Lakes symbolize purity. And prayer flags carry blessings on the wind. In this culture, people do not seek to conquer nature. They strive to live in harmony with it. The story of the Tibetan Plateau began around 50 million years ago, when the Indian tectonic plate collided with the Eurasian. Continental crust could not sink into the mantle. Instead, it compressed, thickened, and gradually rose upward. This immense geological process created this vast high-altitude plateau that continues to rise even today. Above 14,000 feet, the atmosphere is much thinner, containing roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. During the day, the thin, exceptionally clear air allows intense solar radiation to heat the ground rapidly. After sunset, however, that heat escapes quickly into space, causing temperatures to plunge. The southern slopes of the Himalayas form a massive barrier. As a result, central Tibet lies in a pronounced rain shadow. Cold steppes and high-altitude semi-deserts dominate the landscape, where vegetation has adapted to short-growing seasons. At the same time, thousands of glaciers feed rivers that supply water to nearly 2 billion people. For more than 1,000 years, life in the region has been shaped by Tibetan Buddhism. This unique religion emerged between the 7th and 9th centuries AD. During this period, Tibetan kings invited Indian scholars and monks and founded the first monasteries. One of the most influential figures was Padmasambhava, an Indian spiritual master revered as the second Buddha. According to tradition, he helped blend classical Indian Buddhism with the indigenous spiritual beliefs. The word Buddha is not a personal name, but a title meaning the awakened one or the enlightened one. The historical Buddha was Siddhartha Gautama, an Indian prince who lived around the 5th century BC. He grew up surrounded by luxury but was profoundly affected after encountering old age, sickness, and death. After years of meditation, Gautama attained enlightenment and became the Buddha. He taught that freedom from suffering can be achieved through ethical living, the cultivation of wisdom. The ultimate goal is to attain nirvana, a state of complete liberation in which the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth comes to an end. Travelling through Tibet, it is impossible not to notice bright strips of cloth stretched between mountain passes. These colourful banners are known as prayer flags. For Buddhists, they are an important part of a spiritual tradition that has existed for millennia. It incorporates elements of the ancient indigenous Burn religion, in which coloured fabrics were used in rituals connected to natural spirits. Over time, this practice acquired a Buddhist meaning and became a symbol of blessing, compassion, and harmony. Each flag is printed with prayers. At the centre is most often the depiction of the wind horse, or lungta. According to Tibetan tradition, it carries a wish-fulfilling jewel on its back. The colours of the flags always appear in a fixed order. Each corresponds to one of the 5 elements in traditional Tibetan cosmology. Blue represents sky and space, white, air and wind, red means fire, green is seen as water, and yellow represents earth. Together they symbolize the balance of natural forces and the interconnection of all living beings. Colourful prayer flags are often attached directly to the tops of Buddhist stupas. A stupa is not a temple. It is not entered for worship, nor does it contain interior space for ritual gatherings. Historically, stupas originated as ancient burial mounds, but in Buddhism their meaning was radically reinterpreted. They became not monuments of death, but models of the spiritual path. Each component corresponds to a stage, an aspect of Buddhist practice. The base symbolizes earth, the foundational support of life. Above it rises the dome, associated with water and meditative concentration. This is followed by a narrowing structure linked to fire and the transformation of consciousness. And then a vertical spire representing air, clarity, and transcendence beyond form. In this way, the stupa functions as a 3-dimensional diagram of Buddhist cosmology and simultaneously as a map of the inner journey. In Tibetan Buddhism, nature is never perceived as a lifeless backdrop. Mountains, rivers, lakes, and even winds are integrated into a sacred structure of the world. Among them, Mount Kailash holds a central position as one of the most revered peaks in Asia. Sacred mountains in the Tibetan tradition are seen as axis mundi, cosmic pillars where the earthly and spiritual realms meet. They are not merely high and remote locations. Symbolically, they are closer to enlightenment itself. In such places, the boundary between ordinary perception and deeper states of consciousness is believed to become thinner. But Mount Kailash occupies a unique status even among other sacred peaks. It rises to 21,600 feet above sea level, but its significance goes far beyond physical geography. In Tibetan Buddhism, Kailash is considered the abode of Buddha Chakrasamvara, and a symbolic axis of the universe. In Hinduism, it is regarded as the dwelling place of Shiva, while in the Burn tradition, it is seen as the center of ancient spiritual power. This convergence of meanings makes Kailash a rare religious crossroads, where multiple traditions blend into a single sacred image. A key element of pilgrimage to Kailash is the Kora, a ritual circumambulation of a sacred site. The full circuit is approximately 32 miles and typically takes several days, as the route passes through demanding mountain conditions. The purpose of the Kora is inner purification. Each step is considered an act of accumulating merit and releasing negative karma. Many pilgrims perform the circuit in a meditative state, while the most devoted complete it through full-body prostrations. In such cases, the pilgrimage can take weeks or even months. While the mountain represents a fixed axis of the world, Lake Manasarova functions as its horizontal counterpart. Together, they form a complete model of the spiritual universe in which form and awareness, stillness and reflection, height and depth exist in perfect balance. Manasarova lies at an altitude of 15,100 feet above sea level, making it one of the highest freshwater lakes in the world. Its exceptionally clear waters and near-perfect circular form give it not only geographical, but also symbolic significance. According to tradition, it was created in the mind of Brahma, which explains its sacred status in Hindu cosmology as well. As with Kailash, multiple religious traditions converge here, each offering its own interpretation. In Buddhist practice, pilgrims often combine the Kora of Mount Kailash with a visit to Lake Manasarova. After the demanding journey, they arrive at the lake's shores to bathe or simply remain in contemplation. Water here is understood as an element of purification, not only physical, but also internal. In the far west of the Tibetan Plateau, among canyons and wind-eroded cliffs, lie the remains of one of the most mysterious Himalayan kingdoms, Gugay. The history of Gugay begins around the 10th century after the collapse of the unified Tibetan Empire. As central authority weakened, a local dynasty emerged that managed to establish a stable kingdom in extremely difficult environmental conditions. The capital of Gugay was built directly into the rock massif, where fortifications were carved into steep canyon walls. In the 11th century, one of the most significant events in Tibetan history took place here. The so-called Second Diffusion of Buddhism. After a period of decline in monastic traditions, the Indian master Atisha arrived in western Tibet at the invitation of local rulers. His teachings became the foundation for the revival of monastic culture, which later developed into the classical schools of Tibetan Buddhism. By the 17th century, the kingdom declined. The reasons remain uncertain. Historians suggest an internal conflict or shifting trade routes. Over time, the population abandoned the fortified cities, and wind, sand, and time began to erode the stone structures. Not far from the ruins, nature itself created an architecture that resembles an ancient city. Jada Earth Forest Geopark, often described as a stone forest or earth towers. An extensive system of erosional landforms transformed over millions of years into vertical pillars, ridges, and canyon walls. The area covers hundreds of square miles, and the formations rise tens, and in some cases, hundreds of feet. Geologically, the Jada Earth Forest was formed from ancient lake and river deposits. The region was once part of a large basin where layers of silt accumulated on the lake bed. Later, as the Tibetan Plateau was uplifted, these deposits were raised to high altitude and gradually exposed. In the region's dry climate, with infrequent but intense rainfall, long-term erosion began to sculpt the terrain. Water carved deep gullies and canyons, while wind accelerated the breakdown of the soft rock. Over time, this process produced the characteristic towers and columns that resemble ruins of an ancient civilization. Located in southeastern Tibet, Yarlung Tsangpo Grand Canyon stretches for hundreds of miles along the river's highly sinuous path. By several measurements, it is considered the deepest canyon on Earth, with depths exceeding 16,400 feet from ridge to riverbed. This is comparable to a vertical cross-section of nearly an entire mid-sized mountain system. The formation of the canyon is the result of two powerful processes: the tectonic uplift and the intense erosional force of the river. As the plateau rose, the river continued to cut downward into the uplifting terrain, gradually deepening its channel. In Tibetan tradition, Yarlung Tsangpo is perceived as a powerful natural space where elemental forces are vividly expressed. The river itself is regarded as one of Tibet's principal life arteries and a symbol of continuous energetic flow. In this sense, the canyon becomes a landscape where the flow of mind passes through some of its most dramatic transformations. Although Yarlung Tsangpo is not a major pilgrimage destination, it is part of Tibet's sacred geography as a space of power and contemplation. The immense canyon acts as a natural corridor through which moisture-laden air from the Indian Ocean penetrates deep into the Tibetan Plateau. As these air masses rise along the slopes of the Himalayas, they cool and release abundant rainfall. Because of this, Ningchi bears little resemblance to the Tibet most travellers imagine. Instead of vast rocky plains, the landscape is dominated by dense coniferous and mixed forests, alpine meadows and fertile river valleys. In spring, Ningchi undergoes another remarkable transformation. The valley slopes become covered with blooming wild peach trees. When the blossoms arrive, the valley shifts into an almost surreal palette. Pale pinks and soft whites spreading across fields. Yet spring in Ningchi is brief. Within weeks, petals scatter across farm paths. And the fields transition to shades of green and yellow. The blossoms disappear almost as suddenly as they came, leaving behind a memory of colour on a landscape that will soon return to its usual high-altitude calm. Mount Kailash is regarded as the spiritual centre of Western Tibet. And in the central part of the plateau, Sepu Kangri holds a special place. Although far less known outside Asia, it is considered one of the most revered sacred peaks in Tibetan Buddhism. Rising to more than 22,600 feet above sea level, Sepu Kangri is one of the highest mountains on the Tibetan Plateau. Because of great elevation and heavy snowfall, the mountain supports one of the largest glacier systems in central Tibet. Massive ice tongues descend slowly along its slopes, feeding numerous streams and alpine lakes scattered around the base. Their waters are exceptionally clear, while their striking turquoise colour comes from powdered rock ground by moving ice. Like many other lofty peaks, the mountain is believed to be the dwelling place of powerful spiritual beings who safeguard the Buddhist teachings. In Tibetan tradition, such mountains are regarded as living entities possessing their own spiritual presence. They are approached with profound respect, and disturbing their natural state is considered a violation of the harmony between humanity and nature. But sanctity is attributed not only to mountains, it's also tied to sites of human practice. Monasteries where the natural landscape merges with the inner world of the practitioner. Nestled on the sacred Mount Ziju in Xizang, the celestial city of Ziju Temple has watched over the region for over 3,000 years. Ziju Temple stands at an elevation of approximately 15,500 feet above sea level, making it one of the highest in Tibet. In the Xizangan language, its name refers to 6 mountain peaks that surround the complex, forming a natural crown. One of the defining characteristics of Ziju Temple is its affiliation with the Burn tradition, an ancient religious system that predates the spread of Buddhism. Here, ritual practice preserve more archaic layers. The perception of the natural landscape as a living sacred system. The monastery is literally carved into the mountain massif and follows its structure. Rock outcrops serve as walls, natural terraces become building platforms, and caves and hollows function as meditation spaces. Travelling through Tibet has never been easy. Towering elevations and permafrost make road construction here a great engineering challenge. These roads are often narrow, demand exceptional caution, and rank among the most challenging drives anywhere. Yet that is precisely what makes many of them so remarkable. One of the finest examples is Nujeng Road, known around the world as the 72 Turns of the Nujeng. Over a relatively short distance, it must lose more than 1 mile in elevation. A straight descent would be impossible, so engineers transformed the mountainside into a gigantic series of switchbacks. One after another, the hairpin bends descend the slope, following the mountain's contours. The road takes its name from the Nujeng River, the upper course of the Salween River, one of Southeast Asia's great waterways. Descending the switchbacks, travellers retrace the river's own journey, from the cold alpine plateau to the warmer valleys below. Tibet is most often associated with snow-covered high-altitude plains. It is therefore particularly surprising to find a place where, for more than 1,000 years, the region's most valuable natural resource has been salt. The banks of the Lancang River in Mongkang County are the only known site where traditional salt production has been preserved unchanged into the present day. The history of these salt fields stretches back at least 1,300 years. Unlike modern industrial production, salt here is still made as it was centuries ago, using only sunlight, wind, and human labour. The key resource lies underground. The valley contains dozens of salt wells, each about 16 to 20 feet deep. Through fissures in the surrounding rock, mineral-rich brine rises naturally to the surface. Workers manually draw it up using wooden buckets and carry it to evaporation fields built on elevated wooden platforms. Under the intense Tibetan sun, the water gradually evaporates, leaving behind salt crystals. Located within the narrow mountain valley of Surda, Larungar is neither a monastery nor a city. Rather, it is a vast monastic educational centre that grew from a small group of disciples into a full-scale spiritual settlement. Initially, it was an empty land where a handful of students built simple huts for practice and study. Within a few years, however, lay practitioners began arriving from across the Tibetan Plateau and beyond. The settlement expanded at unbelievable speed, transforming into a vast spiritual community. From above, Larungar appears as a sea of red points cascading down the mountainsides and filling every available space. The main academic and ritual buildings lie at the bottom of the valley, while residential areas rise upward along the slopes. A whole network of small red wooden huts and cells densely covers the valley slopes. For this reason, Larungar is often described as a city that grew by itself, shaped not by planning but by geography. Among the monastic landscapes of the Tibetan Plateau, there are places that can no longer be described as simple monasteries. They evolve into entire religious settlements, where spiritual practice becomes a way of life for thousands of people. One of the most striking examples is Yarchan Gar, a vast Buddhist complex in eastern Tibet located at an elevation of around 13,000 feet. Yarchan Gar is often referred to as a city of nuns, and this description is not accidental. A significant portion of its residents are women, Buddhist nuns who have devoted themselves to long-term practice and study. At its peak periods, the site was home to tens of thousands of practitioners, making it one of the largest monastic communities in the world. The dwellings of the nuns are small, densely packed wooden or stone structures. They are simple and functional, with no decorative excess. Inside, space is minimal, sometimes reduced to just enough room for meditation and sleep. This environment reflects one of Buddhism's central principles, the rejection of excess and the cultivation of inner focus. Situated at an elevation of over 13,000 feet, Litang stands at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. It has long served as an important stop for trading caravans and is now regarded as one of eastern Tibet's cultural centres. Yet Liteng's greatest attraction lies beyond its outskirts, where vast high-altitude meadows stretch for dozens of miles. In summer, Liteng grasslands become a vast green sea beneath slowly drifting clouds. While herds of yaks graze peacefully across the plains. Most residents traditionally practice nomadic pastoralism, moving their herds between seasonal grazing grounds. Even today, many families continue to follow the same rhythm as their ancestors. During spring and summer, they establish camps across the open grasslands, returning to more sheltered locations as winter approaches. The symbol of this nomadic world is the traditional Tibetan yurt. Woven from coarse yak hair fabric, these simple shelters provide excellent protection against cold winds. The tent can be dismantled, transported with the herd, and reassembled relatively quickly, making it perfectly suited to a mobile pastoral lifestyle. Further north, the landscape becomes once again stark and severe. Here rises one of the region's principal mountain systems, the Tanggula Mountains. This extensive range stretches for about 250 miles, forming a natural boundary between Tibet and Qinghai province. There are no sharply isolated peaks. Instead, what stretches before the eye is a vast, high-altitude world of snowfields. Glaciers in these mountains feed the headwaters of the Yangtze, the longest river in Asia, as well as the upper reaches of the Mekong and the Salween. These rivers then flow through Southeast Asia, supporting the lives of hundreds of millions of people. In the central Tibetan Plateau, north of Lhasa, at an elevation of around 15,000 feet, lies one of Tibet's most renowned lakes, Namtso. Its name translates as Heavenly Lake, a designation that reflects not only its altitude but also its central position in Tibetan sacred geography. The water is cold, clear, and mineral-rich, and its colour shifts from deep blue to nearly silvery tones. In Tibetan Buddhism, Namtso is regarded as a sacred lake and a place of spiritual power. It belongs to the broader system of sacred waters across Tibet, where lakes are understood as manifestations of purified consciousness and energy. A distinctive landmark in this landscape is the so-called Sacred Elephant Rock. This natural formation on the shore of Namtso resembles the silhouette of an elephant leaning toward the water. In Tibetan symbolism, the elephant represents strength, stability, and wisdom. For this reason, the formation is not perceived as a coincidence of erosion, but as a meaningful expression of sacred presence within nature. On the shores of Lake Namtso, one can spot Tibetan wild asses or kiangs. They appear in the open spaces near the water, where pasture lands, salt flats, and rare sources of fresh water intersect. Kiangs live at elevations over 11,000 feet, making them among the largest mammals adapted to such extreme altitudes. Their physiology is finely tuned to low oxygen conditions and harsh climate. A dense coat provides insulation against cold winds, while enlarged lungs allow them to extract oxygen from thin air. These animals are highly mobile and live a nomadic existence, moving across the plateau in search of grazing land. Herds can range from a few dozen individuals to several hundred, particularly in areas with abundant vegetation. In Tibetan culture, the Kiang is widely regarded as a symbol of freedom and untamed nature. Its image is associated with open space and independence, reflecting the ethos of the nomadic world. Shigatse, Tibet's second largest city and a historic crossroads of religion and trade, sits at roughly 12,800 feet. Its identity is closely tied to Tashil Hunpo Monastery, one of the most important monastic institutions in Tibetan Buddhism. Founded in 1447, it grew into the seat of the Panchen Lama, the second highest ranking Lama in the Gelug school. Massive golden roofs dominate the hillside, rising above whitewashed walls and a maze of chapels. Shigatse's streets still carry echoes of its role as a trade hub. But above both town and monastery looms another landmark, the Shigatse Dzong, or Shigatse Fortress. Perched on a rocky ridge, it served as a regional administrative stronghold and the traditional home of the local governors known as the Dizis. In Lhasa, another fortress, the Patala Palace, rises above the streets like a vast stone ridge. Part monastery, part memory of an older Tibet. From a distance, its white and red walls seem to grow directly out of the hill, an anchor point in a wide valley. Up close, the scale becomes clearer. Thick walls, narrow windows, long staircases climbing in slow, deliberate tiers. For centuries, this was the winter residence of the Dalai Lamas and the centre of a system where religious authority and political leadership were intertwined. The Red Palace, the spiritual core, holds chapels filled with golden stupas of past Dalai Lamas and shelves of carefully wrapped scriptures. In contrast, the White Palace once housed offices and living quarters, simpler rooms, but still part of the same immense structure that seems to fold endlessly into itself. From the upper terraces, the old streets of Lhasa spread outward in a pattern shaped by centuries of pilgrimage and ritual. built mainly in the 17th century, but rooted in a much older foundation. The Potala Palace is a layered record of Tibetan life. Among the many high-altitude lakes of the region, Yamdrok holds a special place. Together with Manasaravar and Namtso, it is considered one of the three great sacred lakes. An ancient belief says that as long as there's Yamdrok, Tibet itself will continue to exist. Monasteries dot the ridgelines around it, including Semding, historically led by one of the few female reincarnate lamas. Tradition holds that the lake is shaped like a massive scorpion. Its long, branching arms stretching through the plateau's folds. The surrounding slopes are home to herders who graze sheep and yaks on patches of tough alpine grass. Small villages sit near the shore where freshwater streams enter the lake. And fishing, rare on much of the plateau, provides an additional source of livelihood. The lake's colour changes through the day, deep blue in the morning, vivid turquoise at noon, and muted jade as clouds roll in from the south. About 25 miles east of Lhasa, Ganden Monastery stands atop Wangbur Mountain. Its name means land of joy. In Buddhist tradition, it refers to the celestial paradise of the future Buddha. Ganden Monastery was founded in 1409 by the great Tibetan teacher Je Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug, or School of Virtue. It was here that he completed the development of a new monastic tradition centered on strict discipline. Over time, the Gelug school became the most influential tradition within Tibetan Buddhism. And its spiritual leaders would later include the Dalai Lamas. For this reason, Ganden is widely regarded as the spiritual birthplace of the Gelug tradition. The southern boundary of the Tibetan Plateau is formed by the greatest mountain range on Earth, the Himalayas. Stretching for more than 1,500 miles, these mountains create a continuous wall of rock, separating the high plateau from the humid subtropical lowlands of South Asia. For thousands of years, the Himalayas have influenced Tibet's history, shielding it from the outside world. Beyond the line of snow-covered peaks lies an entirely different world. Crossing the main crest, the dry, frigid climate gives way to the densely populated valleys of South Asia. The Himalayas are home to the greatest concentration of the world's highest peaks. Of the planet's 14 mountains rising above 26,000 feet, 10 are found within the Himalayas. The most famous of them is Mount Everest, known to Tibetans as Chomolungma. Rising over 29,000 feet, it is the highest point on Earth. Its Tibetan name means Holy Mother of the World. And long before the first European maps were drawn, the mountain was revered as a place of spiritual significance. Alongside Everest stands another legendary summit, K2, the world's second highest mountain, reaching 28,251 feet. Although K2 belongs geographically to the Karakoram rather than the Himalayas, together these ranges form the Great Arc of Central Asia's highest mountains. While Everest is best known for its height, K2 is widely regarded as the most difficult and dangerous of all the 8,000ers. Its exceptionally steep slopes and unpredictable weather have earned it a reputation as one of the most challenging mountains on Earth. On the endless steppes of Tibet, the presence of yaks is constant, steady, unhurried, and absolutely essential. These animals are the real backbone of the region's logistics, carrying the weight of an entire trekking and expedition industry on their wool-covered shoulders. At altitude, where the air thins and every step feels heavier, yaks do the work that no machine can manage. They haul tents, food, gas cylinders, ropes, ice screws, and dozens of other pieces of gear that climbers depend on once they reach base camp. Much of what appears as a modern mountaineering operation exists only because a yak carried it up a narrow trail, often for days at a time. A single animal can haul well over 150 pounds in terrain where a human load has to be carefully rationed to prevent altitude illness. Visitors often mistake Zo yak cattle hybrids for true yaks on the lower parts of the trail. Purebred yaks prefer the colder upper zones and overheat easily below about 12,000 feet. The hybrids take over the mid-elevations, forming a seamless logistical chain that reaches all the way from Lukla to Everest Base Camp. Meanwhile, in Bhutan, Takchang Monastery, better known as Tiger's Nest, is perched on cliffs over the Paro Valley. At roughly 10,000 feet, the monastery clings to a granite wall some 3,000 feet above the valley floor. Constructing a complex on a vertical cliff in the 17th century required courage and communal effort. Materials were carried on foot, and local knowledge of the rock ensured that the monastery could withstand the elements over centuries. The name comes from legend. In the 8th century, a revered Buddhist master is said to have flown to this site on the back of a tigress to subdue local spirits. Since then, Tiger's Nest has grown into a spiritual heart of the kingdom. Despite its fame, The climb to reach it preserves a sense of reverence. The trail winds through a forest of rhododendron and bamboo, passes prayer wheels and mani stones etched with mantras. The monastery maintains its sense of seclusion and spiritual purpose. Photography is limited in inner sanctums, and silence is a requirement in many areas. Down in the valley, Punakha Dzong rests on water and open space. Not only an important monastery, but the former seat of the Bhutanese government. Its name translates to the Palace of Great Happiness, and even at first sight, the meaning feels literal. Bhutanese dzongs are fortresses as well as monasteries, a blend of administrative and spiritual life. Punakha's location at the meeting of two rivers was strategic for defense, but it also carries deep symbolism. The twin currents represent compassion and wisdom, two fundamental aspects of Buddhist philosophy flowing together at a place of governance and ritual. Inside, courtyards open onto assembly halls decorated with murals. And the central tower, or Utse, rises above the complex as a spiritual anchor. Punakha Dzong has witnessed many defining moments in Bhutan's history, including the coronation of the first king in 1907, marking the unification of the country under a hereditary monarchy. Bamboo groves in Bhutan host red pandas. A species most visitors know exists, but few ever see. They live in the lower and mid-altitude forests, usually between 7,000 and 12,000 feet. Despite their name, red pandas are not closely related to the giant panda. They belong to their own unique evolutionary branch. They feed mostly on young bamboo shoots, supplemented by berries, blossoms, and the occasional insect. Their curved claws and flexible ankles let them descend trees head first. One of the few mammals capable of doing so. The species is vulnerable, threatened by habitat loss and climate pressures that push bamboo forests higher up the slopes. In national parks across the Himalaya, conservation programs focus on protecting these habitats and reducing disturbances from livestock and settlements. In the northernmost reaches of Nepal, Upper Mustang lies in the rain shadow of the Himalayas. The hills are dry, their colours muted and earthy, ranging from pale ochres to deep reds and browns. The soil is loose and crumbly, streaked with erosion patterns, and cliffs rise in sharp folds, forming labyrinths of ridges. Winding through these hills are trails once used by traders carrying salt from Tibet and grain from the lower valleys. Among dry mesas, the caves are perhaps the most compelling and mysterious feature. Carved directly into the cliffs, some are simple shelters, while others are expansive complexes with multiple chambers stacked atop each other. For centuries, they served multiple purposes. Meditation retreats for monks, dwellings for hermits, storage for crops. Inside, the walls are often smooth, shaped by human hands, and occasionally decorated with simple carvings. Often called the roof of the world for its towering mountains and elevated plateaus, Ladakh occupies one of the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. It stretches across valleys and plateaus at elevations ranging from 9,000 to over 18,000 feet, where the air is thin and the climate unforgiving. A cold desert with very little rainfall. Summers are brief but bright, winters long and bitter. And temperature swings can be extreme even during the day. Among this harsh, rugged wilderness, Nubra Valley stands out. A place where the Indus River and its tributaries carve fertile oases from the otherwise stark terrain. Meltwater from glacier-fed threads lays out long green ribbons of willow and sea buckthorn across a landscape that otherwise looks too dry to support anything. Along the valley in the middle of Rocky Mountains hides a patch of sand dunes. Not warm tropical ones, but pale, fine, almost skeletal. They're remnants of an ancient lake bed reshaped by the Shyok River as it shifted over time. Bactrian camels, two-humped survivors of the old Silk Route, still graze around the edges. Their ancestors carried salt, wool, and turquoise towards Central Asia. Today, they carry visitors for short rides, a small nod to the valley's trading past. A little farther north sits Diskit, the largest settlement in the valley. Above it, on a rocky ridge, stands Ladakh's oldest surviving monastery. For centuries, the monastery watched over the trade route that threaded its way towards Central Asia. Its whitewashed buildings are scattered across a sandstone hill following the contours of the rock. Across the ridge stands the 100-foot statue of Maitreya Buddha, completed in 2010. Though modern, its symbolism is rooted in centuries of tradition. The statue faces west, toward the border with Pakistan, deliberately placed as a gesture of peace in a region shaped by geopolitics. Nubra Valley is connected to the outer world by Kardung La, one of the highest mountain passes in the world. Its exact elevation has been debated for years, but it sits at roughly 17,600 feet. High enough that every breath feels a little thinner. Long before road crews carved switchbacks into these slopes, caravans made the crossing on foot and camelback, hauling goods between the Nubra Valley and Leh. Those travellers weren't thrill seekers, they were merchants and messengers, people whose livelihoods depended on navigating this harsh corridor. When the modern road was built in the 1970s, its role shifted from commerce to logistics. For decades, the pass was advertised as the highest motorable road in the world. Whether or not the claim is technically accurate doesn't matter much. What makes Kardung La iconic is its character, not statistics. The feeling of being suspended between two very different worlds. As the road winds down from Kardung La, the air gains weight. Then Leh, the capital of the Ladakh region, slowly comes into view. Overlooking the city from a rugged cliff, Leh Palace, a 9-story structure, was built in the early 1600s by King Sengye Namgyal. Modelled on the Potala Palace in Lhasa, but on a smaller, humbler scale, it was once the political and cultural centre of the Ladakhi kingdom. Abandoned in the 19th century, the fortress is weathered, darkened by sun and sand, but that only adds to its presence. From the upper terraces, we can see the white dome of Shanti Stupa. A monument of peace built in the late 1980s by Japanese and Ladakhi Buddhists. The stupa's design is modern compared to older Himalayan religious structures, with clean lines and a 2-level terrace accessible by a set of stairs. Leh itself has grown steadily over the past decades, driven by tourism, military presence, and improved road access. Yet the historical core around the palace and the main bazaar still reflects its past as a trading town. Many of the old streets follow the same lines used when caravans pass through. About 12 miles southeast of Leh, the Indus Valley widens just enough for a series of villages and agricultural fields to take hold. On a hill above one of these settlements stands Thixi Monastery, one of Ladakh's most prominent monastic complexes. The monastery belongs to the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism and was established in the early 15th century. Over time, additional temples, living quarters, assembly halls, and shrines were built as the community grew. The surrounding views provide a clear sense of why monasteries were often built on elevated ground. Partly for defence in earlier centuries, partly for visibility. But also for practical access to sunlight and airflow in a cold desert environment. Located about 9 miles from Leh, Shea Monastery rises atop a rocky hill overlooking the broad Indus Valley. For more than 1,000 years, this site has served as a symbol of the Buddhist tradition of the Western Himalayas. The monastery's architecture appears to grow naturally out of the mountain itself. Whitewashed walls, terraces, stupas, and small chapels climb the hillside before merging into the royal palace above. From the summit, sweeping views extend across the fertile Indus Valley, framed by the stark, barren mountain ranges of Ladakh. Panlong Road is located in western China in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. This high-altitude mountain pass winds through the rugged ranges of the Kunlun Mountains at elevations of roughly 12,000 feet. The mountains here are too steep, the valleys too deep, and the elevation changes too abrupt. Within a relatively short stretch, the road twists through hundreds of turns, creating its unmistakable appearance. To climb from one high mountain valley to another, engineers had to stretch the route across the slope. In an environment of thin air, unstable slopes, and extreme seasonal conditions, a direct ascent would have been impossible. Instead, the road gains and loses elevation gradually through a continuous sequence of carefully engineered hairpin turns. Throughout this journey, Tibet reveals itself as an entire world, with its own understanding of humanity's place in the universe. Over the centuries, rulers have changed, new technologies have appeared, and modern roads have reached even the most remote valleys. Yet despite the rapid advance of civilization, this land has remarkably preserved its unique identity. Nomadic communities still follow their herds along ancient routes, much as their ancestors did hundreds of years ago. On mountain passes, the wind carries colourful prayer flags covered with ancient mantras. People still see the surrounding world not as a resource to be consumed, but as a living space of which they themselves are a part. The true uniqueness of Tibet comes from a worldview that has developed here over many centuries. It is the understanding that humans do not stand above nature, but exist together with it in a constant state of balance.